And I would add one example that when I was on the Board of Education, I didn't even know what was the party affiliation of some of the people, and we all worked together towards a common goal. I want to say one briefly also on, I'm not going to repeat what Robert said, but I second it. And I would say, although Bill didn't pay me to do this, the current mayor is also welcoming and has the same attitude of, you know, what are you interested in? Are you willing to get involved? And here are some committees that we can include you in. Now, in terms of values, I have to say, as you know, I wasn't born in the US, and I always admired and valued the values that the US represented, and I still do. And I think the institutions in this country are, you know, the best in the world. They're being challenged, but they're the best in the world. And so I think I agree that, you know, we should teach this, and we should perhaps do a lot more so that kids understand and appreciate what they have. And that goes to the other point, the Marxist point. People who grew up in other countries, in particular in countries where there's no freedom, the institutions are not good, totally understand how great we have it here. And I think that we really should try to understand it, and if necessary, send kids and people to other countries so they can see for themselves and make the comparisons. As to Marxist theories, an economist, so Marx was a great thinker, no question about it. It's a lot of great ideas. Unfortunately, they don't work. So I think that's the bottom line. And I think, you know, when Mayor Mamdani was elected, so one of my friends who happens to be an Iranian doctor, Iranian origin doctor, said, why is it that every 20 years they're going to try Marxism again to see that it doesn't work? So I think I can tell you quite a lot about that, why it doesn't work. There are reasons for that. The theory is good, it just, the incentives are all wrong, and the system just cannot work. And hasn't worked. I mean, there's no example where it ever worked. So I agree, but I do think, having said that, I do think it is important, if you study economics, that you should be exposed to thinking, the thoughts of Marx in a critical way. You should really understand what he said and why we, you know, mainstream economists don't think these ideas are workable.
Yeah.
Stop here.
Thank you. So just to refresh myself, the question was participation.
Yeah, what's the cause? You know, to the extent you think it's on the decline, you know, what's causing it?
No, and by the way, I'm just honored to be on this esteemed panel, and I would love to just have 5 hours to dig into these three gentlemen, just pick their brain and have a conversation. But several things that they said, I thought were
Just
so.
call me. Just call me.
Yeah, I appreciate it. And I know I can't.
Don't worry about it.
You know you can.
You know, some of the things, I was struck by some of the things that were shared and some of the thoughts, and if I may make an observation or two, which was a line that Robert shared with me when I ran, as a way to politely dispute whatever might have been said. So thank you.
May I interject? It's true. Opinion today is a code word. Do you want my opinion? Oh, your opinion is more important than my opinion. Your opinion matters. My opinion isn't important. By the time you get done trying to understand what that word meant, you forgot what the opinion was for. So I told him, use the word observation, and it's more receptive. And that's what he's talking about.
He's teachable.
Yeah.
Teachable, right? So, first of all, I love the acronym. I love the acronym thing. I have one with my children that I've shared with them since they were very, very small. It's PPLK. Patience, politeness, love, and kindness, right? So I have drilled into them whenever they're frustrated with me, my father, their siblings, each other, whoever it is, always remain patient, polite, loving, and kind. And what that looks like is, if you're patient with somebody, they're having a bad day, you know, we can't ever put ourselves in each other's shoes, so, you know, to react to, you know, somebody slighting you somehow, or whatever that perception might be patient. And maintain politeness and, you know, civility, I think is another great word for that. And if you're always coming from a place of love, kindness, you know, sometimes the truth, or I should say, sometimes shielding somebody from the truth or your true observations, you might think it's a kindness, but if it's not truthful, it's not a kindness in any way, right? Sometimes the kindness is, you know, a critique or what have you. So I really appreciated that. I personally think that, and I'll try to keep it local, and I want to just curtail my remarks to be non-critical of anybody specifically. I just want to make some observations. So, in general, what I've experienced having grown up in town and participated behind the scenes, I have a unique perspective having started as a young guy, like very young, and obviously everybody here started young, but I was 15 years old. And the interesting thing that happens when you're a kid in an environment that's particularly run by adults or people, you know, at least, you know, 10 years older than you, you're sort of invisible. Despite my stature at the time, you know, everything happens and, you know, you're sort of an afterthought. And so you start to see people behave, not with the, you know, public agent persona, but like how things really operate. I found that very revealing and interesting. And when Robert made the comment about the 3 types of people, that brought me back immediately, because I've observed it in my life in many ways where somebody that's, I would call it actualized, right? They're there out of the service that was meant in the framers, like when they founded this whole thing and they put these ideas together of all the classic liberalism and the rights of the individual and the rights of property and the value of the individual and of life. That somebody coming in, you know, you didn't camp out in an office for 2, 3, 4, 5 terms or jockey positions within the same, you know, governing body or just spend a life as a politician. You had to take time out from your life and your family. And that was a sacrificial service. And I don't see that happening much anymore. Even when it's a, you know, quote unquote volunteer service, right? And there's nobility in volunteerism, but I find much more common now. In the third example that you shared, and this might be a little bit strong, but those are tendencies of psychopaths, right? Sincerely, and you know, it might be a little difficult, but the idea is when somebody's lying to your face or they're saying what you want to hear, but they know that they have an ulterior idea or agenda, and they just have to go through you, keep you content, and go about their business. That's a symptom of psychopathy. And there's a lot of that running around all over the place. And so I think to answer the question more directly, we should definitely go towards what we have in common, because the commonality is, like Mr. Pacheco said, he got his 2 friends back together. Why? Because they have more in common than they do that is, correct, you know, separating them. Whether it's a political ideal or a culture or where you came from or any of that. And I grew up in a house where all of those differences, all of that diversity, as it would be, was celebrated not as the core, but as like the flavor, right? The recipe is we're all Americans. The recipe is we all live in a constitutional republic where we're guaranteed these rights that are not given by the authority of the government, but by our Creator. And that's not taught, right? So when you are giving, when you're giving yourself a higher authority than anything else in your world, that worldview is dangerous. And I think we're seeing the outcome of that. And we can go down a whole rabbit hole that we don't have time for tonight, but I think that the participation is very limited. There's probably only, if I had to count it, you know, some of those folks that serve in multiple capacities, it's because nobody else is there to do the job, right? So some folks are just sort of stuck and say, oh, I gotta run for the board now? Okay, fine. So if you need something here, okay, yeah, I'll do that. I thought I was gonna get a break. I thought I was gonna have a little more time to myself, but you get sucked back into service. But really, there's probably, in our town, in our small town, we've got 9,500 residents. There's probably only 50 or 60 people serving on all of the boards, committees, commissions, and so forth, when I know that there's plenty of other qualified people. So how do we get over that obstacle and sometimes maybe headlock some folks into service? But it seems to me that the ideals that are shared among those small groups, and it's not Leonia, it's everywhere, there's a lot of echo chamber, there's a lot of groupthink, and I think that's partly why we're in a situation we might find some discontentment with, economically or otherwise.
Sort of leads into the next